I stared at my phone screen, and for the first time in 44 years, I didn't feel the urge to apologize for existing. I saw the name saved under her contact list, just my birth name, clinical and cold, and compared it to the best child and favorite son titles she gave my brothers. That was the moment I realized I wasn't losing a mother. I was finally letting go of a ghost that had been haunting me since I was 11 years old. But how do you tell your dying father that the woman he remarried is the same woman who let you rot in your own skin as a child? And more importantly, how do you handle it when she looks you in the eye and tells you that you're only there to steal her inheritance, while you're the one scrubbing her floors? The silence on the other end of the phone wasn't just quiet anymore. It was the sound of a bridge finally burning to the ground, and for the first time, I was the one holding the match. Growing up, you're taught that a mother's love is the one constant in the universe. It's supposed to be the safety net, the lighthouse, the one person who sees you when the rest of the world looks away. But in my house, the only thing constant was the clink of glass and the heavy, sweet, sour smell of cheap vodka that seemed to seep out of the very wallpaper. I was 11 when the lights went out. That's the only way I can describe it. One day, my mum was there, present, maybe a little stressed, but there. The next, she had retreated into a bottle, and she didn't come out for nearly a decade. From the age of 11 until I was 19, my formative years weren't spent learning how to navigate friendships or dreaming about the future. They were spent navigating the minefield of an alcoholic's mood swings. I became a ghost in my own home. I learned how to walk without making the floorboards creak. I learned how to check the level of the liquid in the bottle without being noticed. And most painfully, I learned that I was completely on my own. There's a specific kind of humiliation that comes with being a young girl going through puberty without a mother to guide you. When you're 12, 13 years old, your body is changing in ways that are terrifying if nobody explains them. My mother was too deep in her haze to notice that I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't know about personal hygiene. I didn't know how to handle my period. I didn't know how to properly wash or care for a changing body. I was walking around in a fog of my own, embarrassed, dirty, and feeling like I was somehow broken because I didn't have the basic tools to be a normal girl. My parents divorced in 1994, which was honestly a mercy, though it felt like the world ending at the time. My dad eventually remarried a woman who, looking back, was a very complicated figure. In the end, she turned out to be a pretty terrible person for her own reasons, but I owe her a debt I can never fully repay. She was the one who looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw a girl who was drowning. She took me in. She treated me like one of her own daughters, alongside her two girls. She was the one who handed me a stick of deodorant and taught me how to use it. She was the one who explained the things a mother should have explained years prior. For a few years, I had a glimpse of what a functional life looked like, even if that foundation eventually crumbled too. But then, life threw a curveball that none of us saw coming. About 20 years ago, my mother finally got sober. It was the miracle everyone had prayed for, and, in a twist that felt like something out of a confusing movie, she and my dad decided to remarry. They found their way back to each other, and for a moment, the family thought the wounds of the past would finally scab over and heal. I wanted to believe it. I really did. I wanted to believe that the woman who had ignored me for my entire adolescence was gone, replaced by a version of my mother who would make up for lost time. But as soon as they moved back into that house together, a new darkness started to creep in. It wasn't the bottle this time. It was something sharper. It was a cold, calculated distaste for me. It started small, a look here, a side comment there, but it quickly evolved into a strange, twisted jealousy. My mother didn't just want her life back. She wanted to be the only person in my father's life. She began to view my relationship with my dad, not as a daughter loving her father, but as a rival for his attention. It was bizarre and deeply unsettling to have your own mother look at you with eyes full of envy because your father smiled when you walked into the room. The hierarchy was established early on. My brothers were the golden boys. On her phone, their contacts were saved with glowing titles. My best child, my favourite child. It's the kind of thing that seems like a joke in a healthy family. But in ours, it was a declaration of war. My name? For a long time, it was something derogatory, something I won't even repeat because it still stings to think about. Eventually, she changed it to just my birth name. No daughter, no honey, no hearts, just a label for a product she never wanted to buy. Fast forward to about a year ago. My dad's health started to take a serious turn for the worse. He's declining, and the man who was once my rock is starting to crumble. I made the decision to move back to my home state. I left my life behind to be near him, to help him through his final chapters. I didn't do it for an inheritance. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because he's my father and I love him. But my mother? She saw my arrival as an invasion. Since I've been back, she's turned into a master of the psychological jab. She'll sit there, watching me scrub the grime off the kitchen counters or prep a week's worth of healthy meals for my dad, and she'll drop these little poison pills into the conversation. At least I never left my children for a man, she'll say, her eyes fixed on her phone. It's a direct hit at my own past, a way to paint me as some kind of absentee parent, when the reality is so much more complex. Then comes the paranoia. I think your dad is afraid of you, she'll whisper, loud enough for me to hear but quiet enough to deny. I know you only moved up here to try to take everything he has. I am making sure he doesn't change his will. It's exhausting. I am 44 years old, and I am being treated like a thieving intruder in my own father's house. I'm the one doing the heavy lifting. When I'm there, I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm making sure his medications are sorted. And what is she doing? She's sitting on the couch, hunched over, playing video games on her phone. She's physically there, but mentally, she's as gone as she was when she was drinking. She's a ghost again, but this time, she's a ghost with a mean streak. The breaking point happened recently. She had the audacity to complain, to actually pout because I didn't cook for her while I was there taking care of my dad. She looked at the meal I'd prepared for him, a man who can barely stand, and asked where hers was. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the words just came out. I am not here for you. That's when the slack comments started from the rest of the family. They told me I should be the bigger person. They told me she's older now, that I should cut her some slack because of her history. But how much slack can you give someone before you're the one being strangled by it? The slack they wanted me to give her felt like a noose I've been wearing since 1991. When my brothers, the golden boys, called me to talk about keeping the peace, I could hear the privilege in their voices. They hadn't lived the same childhood I had. When our mother was drinking, they were either too young to understand the neglect, or, being boys, they weren't expected to manage the household. They didn't have to worry about the specific, intimate shames of being a young girl whose mother didn't even notice she was bleeding or dirty. To them, Mum was sick back then and cranky now. To me, she was a void that had suddenly developed teeth. My brother Mark called me one Tuesday evening, just as I was finishing a batch of meal prep containers for Dad's fridge. I was exhausted. My back ached from scrubbing the grout in their bathroom, a job Mum hadn't touched in months. And my phone buzzed with his favourite child energy. "Sis, you've got to tone it down," he said, his voice breezy. Mum called me crying. She says you treat her like a guest in her own home. She says you won't even put a plate out for her when you cook. I stood in that kitchen, looking at the steam rising from the vegetable soup I'd made specifically because Dad's digestion was failing. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "I am here for Dad. I drive 3 hours round trip 3 times a week. I clean the house. I do the laundry. I organise his heart meds. Mum sits on the sofa and plays Candy Crush while his oxygen tank beeps for a refill. Why am I the one who needs to tone it down? She's sensitive, you know that, Mark replied, dismissing years of trauma with a single word. She went through a lot with the recovery. Just give her a break. She's 65. She's not as fast as she used to be. It's not about speed, Mark. It's about the fact that she looks at me like I'm a predator. She told me to my face that I'm only here to steal Dad's money. Do you have any idea how that feels? To be the only one actually doing the work while being accused of being a thief? There was a pause on the other end. She's just worried about the future. You know how Dad is. He's always had a soft spot for you. A soft spot. That was the phrase that triggered her the most. To my mother, my father's love was a finite resource, like a tank of gas. She believed that every ounce of affection or concern he showed me was gas being siphoned out of her own tank. It didn't matter that they had been remarried for 20 years. It didn't matter that she had him all to herself while I was living states away, building a life and raising my own kids. The moment I stepped back into the picture to care for a dying man, she reverted to a territorial, jealous teenager. The jealousy manifested in the most bizarre ways. I remember one afternoon I was sitting on the edge of Dad's recliner, holding his hand. He was having a particularly bad day, short of breath, confused, his skin looking like parchment. He leaned his head back and whispered, "I'm so glad you're here, sweetheart. I don't know what I'd do without you." It was a beautiful, quiet moment, until the screen door slammed. Mum marched into the living room, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She didn't ask how he was feeling. She didn't offer him water. She looked at our joined hands and let out a sharp, mocking titter. "Oh, look at the big performance," she sneered. "Are you recording this for your Facebook? Look at me, the saintly daughter. It's pathetic, really." Dad's grip on my hand tightened, but he didn't say anything. He never did. That was the hardest part to swallow. My father, the man I moved across state lines to protect, was terrified of her. He had spent 20 years walking on eggshells to keep her sober and happy, and in doing so, he had become a spectator to her cruelty toward me. "I'm just sitting with my father, Mum," I said, my voice flat. "Your father?" she mimicked, her voice rising an octave. "You think he's your father? He's my husband. He belongs in this house with me. You're just a visitor who stayed too long. And I see what you're doing with those cleaning trips. I saw you looking through the desk in the den, looking for the deed, looking for the life insurance policies." I felt a flash of heat behind my eyes. I had been in that desk looking for his updated medical proxy forms because the hospital needed them. "I don't want the house, Mum. I want Dad to be comfortable. I want him to have a clean floor and a meal that isn't a microwave burrito." "Liars always have the best excuses," she said, turning her back on us and heading for the kitchen. "I'm making sure he doesn't change a thing. I've already talked to the lawyer. You're getting exactly what you deserve. Nothing." The nothing she was referring to wasn't just money. She wanted me to have nothing of him. No memories, no peace, no final connection. It was a scorched earth policy. That night, as I drove home in the dark, the highway lights blurring into long streaks of white and red, I thought about the woman who had actually raised me. My dad's second wife, the one Mom hated with a burning passion. I thought about the afternoon she sat me down in front of a mirror when I was 14. I was a mess, hair matted, skin breaking out, wearing clothes that didn't fit and hadn't been washed properly. She hadn't been sweet about it. She was a tough, sometimes cold woman. But she looked at me and said, "Your mother isn't going to do this, so I will. You are a young woman, and you will not walk around looking like you've been discarded." She taught me how to scrub my face. She bought me my first real bras. She showed me how to be a person. And yet, here was my biological mother, 20 years sober, acting as if she was the one who had sacrificed everything for me. She would tell people at her AA meetings about the struggles of motherhood, and how blessed she was to have her family back. She used our reconciliation as a trophy, a badge of her sobriety, while simultaneously treating me like a stain she couldn't quite bleach out. The slack my family wanted me to give her was really just permission for her to keep being a bully. They wanted me to absorb her toxicity so they didn't have to deal with the fallout of her being upset. If I stayed quiet, the family stayed whole. If I spoke up, I was the one causing drama. But the drama wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the woman who had saved my brother's names as favourite and best, while I remained a nameless entity on her home screen. I started noticing more things as the weeks went by. Small, petty acts of sabotage. I'd buy Dad a specific type of high-protein yogurt he liked. The next time I came over, the containers would be opened and dumped in the trash, or hidden behind jars of pickles so he couldn't find them. I'd wash his favourite soft blanket. She'd take it and put it in the back of a high closet where neither he nor I could reach it without a ladder. "Where's the blue blanket, Mum?" I asked one afternoon. "I don't know," she said, her eyes never leaving her phone. "Maybe you took it home with you. You seem to like taking things that don't belong to you." The accusation was so absurd it was almost funny. But then I realised she wasn't just being petty. She was gaslighting me. She was trying to make me doubt my own actions, or better yet, make Dad doubt me. She started telling him that I was forgetting things. "Oh, she didn't bring your meds today, honey," she'd tell him while I was in the other room. I had to handle it. She's so scattered lately. Maybe she shouldn't be driving all this way. I'd walk into the room with the pill organizer in my hand, and the look on her face wasn't shame. It was a challenge. A cold, hard stare that said, "Go ahead, call me a liar, see who he believes." I was 44 years old, a mother myself, a professional, a grown woman. And in that house, under that roof, I felt like that 11-year-old girl again, wondering why I wasn't enough to make my mother want to be a mother. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She didn't hate me because of what I was doing. She hated me because I was a witness. I was the living, breathing reminder of the years she spent at the bottom of a bottle. My brothers were young enough to have their memories blurred or rewritten. But I remember. I remember the smell of the house. I remember the nights the power went out because she forgot to pay the bill. I remember the hunger. By being there, by caring for Dad, by being a good daughter, I was highlighting every way she had failed, and she couldn't handle the glare of that light. The hardest part about being the discarded child is that you're often the only one who sees the truth. My brothers, Mark and David, lived in a completely different reality. To them, Mum's sobriety was a finish line. They acted as if the moment she stopped drinking, all the years of neglect, the filth and the emotional vacuum simply ceased to exist. They were the success stories. They had stayed in her good graces, likely because they never asked her to be accountable. They were the favourite child and the best child, because they were easy. They didn't carry the scent of her failure on them, but I did. Every time she looked at me, she saw the girl who had to be taught how to wash her own hair by another woman. She saw the girl who knew exactly how many bottles were hidden in the laundry basket. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a ledger of her own sins, and she hated me for being the one to hold the pen. One afternoon, both of my brothers came over to help with Dad. I use the term loosely. They showed up with a pizza, sat on the back deck with a couple of beers, and talked about sports, while I was inside changing Dad's bedsheets because he'd had an accident. Mum was right there, sitting in her recliner, her thumbs flying across her phone screen as she played some mindless game. The sound of the digital pings and cheers from her game felt like needles in my ears, while I listened to my father's heavy, laboured breathing from the bedroom. "Mum!" I called out from the hallway, my arms full of soiled linens. Dad needs some water and he's a little disoriented. Can you just sit with him for a minute while I start the laundry?" She didn't even look up. "He's fine, he's just sleeping. You're always hovering over him like a vulture. Let the man breathe." "He's not sleeping, Mum. He's confused. He asked for his mother 5 minutes ago. He needs someone to just hold his hand." She let out an audible groan, the kind a teenager makes when asked to do chores. "Mark! David!" she shouted toward the back deck. "Your sister's being dramatic again. Come tell her to leave me alone." My brothers came trooping in, smelling of sunshine and beer, looking at me with those "here she goes again" expressions. "Sis, come on," David said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's a Saturday. Relax a little. Mum's earned a break, hasn't she? She's been through a lot." I felt the air leave my lungs. "She's been through a lot?" "She's sitting in a chair. I'm the one who's been here since 8 a.m. I'm the one who's cleaning up his—" I stopped myself, glancing at the bedroom door. I wouldn't strip my father of his dignity just to win an argument with my brothers. "You chose to move back," Mark reminded me, his voice maddeningly calm. "Nobody forced you. If it's too much for you, maybe you should take a step back. Let Mum handle it. It's her house." "She doesn't handle it," I hissed, stepping closer to them so Dad wouldn't hear. "The trash hasn't been taken out in a week. There's mouldy food in the fridge. She doesn't even give him his heart medication on time if I'm not here to nag her. She's not handling anything. She's waiting for him to pass so she can stop pretending to care." The room went ice cold. My mother finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes weren't filled with tears or shame. They were filled with a sharp, glittering malice. "You see," she said to my brothers, her voice trembling with a fake, practiced frailty. "You see how she talks to me? She thinks I'm incompetent. She wants me declared unfit so she can take over the estate. She's been whispering to the doctors, trying to turn them against me. She wants to put me in a home and take your father's money." It was a masterclass in manipulation. In one breath, she had turned my genuine concern for Dad's health into a cold-blooded conspiracy. And my brothers, God bless them, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. "Is that true?" David asked, his brow furrowing. "You're talking to his doctors behind Mum's back?" "I'm talking to his doctors because I'm his primary caregiver," I yelled, the frustration finally boiling over. "I'm the one who drives him to the oncology centre. I'm the one who knows his blood pressure readings. Mum doesn't even know the name of his cardiologist." "I know enough," Mum snapped, standing up. She walked over to the counter and picked up her phone, waving it at me. "I know that I'm the wife. I'm the one on the deed. I'm the one he chose. You're just the mistake he had with the woman he couldn't stand." That was a lie. My parents were married for years before the alcohol tore them apart. But it didn't matter if it was a lie. It was a heat-seeking missile designed to hurt. My brothers looked uncomfortable, but they didn't defend me. They never did. They just wanted the yelling to stop so they could go back to their pizza and their favourite child status. "I think you should go home for the day," Mark said, not looking me in the eye. "You're worked up. You're making Mum upset, and Dad doesn't need the stress." I looked at the three of them, the mother who had abandoned me emotionally decades ago, and the brothers who were helping her do it again. I felt like I was drowning in the middle of a desert. I went into the bedroom to say goodbye to Dad. He was awake now, his eyes cloudy but fixed on me. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow, Dad," I whispered. "Don't leave," he rasped, his hand fumbling for mine. She gets loud when you're not here." My heart shattered into a million pieces. He knew. He was trapped in that house with a woman who treated him like a burden and sons who treated him like a memory already buried. But what could I do? If I stayed, the friction would only escalate. If I tried to move him, she'd call the police and accuse me of kidnapping. She held all the legal cards and she knew it. As I walked out through the kitchen, my mother was back in her chair. She didn't look up as I passed, but as I reached the door, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Don't bother bringing that casserole tomorrow. I threw the last one out. Tasted like dirt. Just like your attitude. I drove home in a trance. When I got to my house, I walked straight to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I saw the lines around my eyes, the grey hairs starting to peek through at my temples. I saw a 44-year-old woman who was still, on some level, waiting for her mother to love her. I thought about my own children. I thought about the way I hold them when they're sick, the way I know every one of their favourite foods, their fears, their dreams. I realised then that my mother's dislike for me wasn't about anything I had done. It was about the fact that I was a functional, loving parent. Every time I showed up for my father, I was proving that her excuses for her own struggles were hollow. I was the proof that you can choose to be better, and to an addict, even a sober one, there is nothing more offensive than the truth. The next few weeks were a blur of escalating tensions. I stopped trying to talk to my brothers. I realised they were lost to the narrative she'd spun. I focused entirely on Dad. I'd arrive, I'd clean, I'd cook, and I'd sit with him. I became a silent ghost in their house, ignoring her barbs, ignoring the way she'd turn up the TV volume when I was trying to read to him. But then, the health crisis we'd all been fearing finally arrived. Dad collapsed in the hallway while I wasn't there. Mum didn't call 911 right away. She called Mark. By the time Mark called me, and by the time the ambulance actually got there, Dad had been on the floor for nearly 45 minutes. When I arrived at the hospital, frantic and breathless, I found Mum in the waiting room. She was surrounded by my brothers. She was weeping, loud, theatrical sobs that drew the eyes of everyone in the room. She looked like the picture of a grieving, devoted wife. "It was so fast," she wailed, clutching Mark's hand. "I tried to help him, but I'm just so frail. I didn't know what to do." I walked up to the group, my chest tight. "Why didn't you call 911 immediately, Mum? Why was there a 40-minute delay?" The sobbing stopped instantly. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but cold. "How dare you? How dare you attack me at a time like this? I was in shock. I was terrified." "She did her best," David snapped, stepping between us. "Not everyone is a cold, calculating machine like you. Leave her alone." "A machine?" I whispered. "I'm the one who told her he was dizzy yesterday. I'm the one who put the emergency alert necklace around his neck. The one she took off him because she said it looked tacky." "Enough!" Mark shouted. "This isn't about you. It's about Dad." But it wasn't about Dad for them. It was about protecting the image of the family they wanted to believe in. The doctor came out a few minutes later. His face was grave. He looked at my mother, then at my brothers, and finally at me. He recognised me. I was the one who was always at the appointments. "He's stable for now," the doctor said. "But the lack of oxygen during the fall has complicated things. We're looking at significant neurological decline. He's going to need 24-hour professional care from here on out. He can't go back to the way things were." The room went silent. 24-hour care. That meant money. That meant a nursing facility or a team of in-home nurses. My mother's face went pale. Not out of concern for Dad's health, but for the one thing she valued more than anything. "How much?" she whispered, her voice finally real. "How much is that going to cost?" The doctor's eyebrows shot up, just for a fraction of a second, before his professional mask slid back into place. He'd seen a lot of grieving families, but even he seemed caught off guard by a wife whose first question after her husband's near-fatal collapse was about the price tag of his survival. "The cost varies depending on the facility and the level of medical intervention required," the doctor said, his voice clipped. "But right now, the priority is stabilization. We'll have a social worker meet with you tomorrow to discuss long-term options." As the doctor walked away, the silence in the waiting room was heavy enough to choke on. I looked at my mother. She wasn't looking at the door where they'd wheeled my father away. She was staring at her purse, her fingers nervously picking at the leather strap. "Well," she muttered, not to anyone in particular. There goes the cruise. There goes the new siding for the house. It's all going to go to some nursing home that'll probably let him rot anyway. I felt a cold, sharp rage bloom in my chest. He's not a line item on a budget, Mum. He's your husband. He's our father. Mark stepped in immediately, his hand on Mum's shoulder. She's just stressed, sis. She's being practical. Someone has to think about the finances. It's not like Dad has an infinite supply of money. He worked 40 years for that money, I counted. He earned the right to be taken care of. If that means every cent he has goes toward making sure he's comfortable and safe, then that's exactly where it should go. Mum looked up then, and the mask of the frail, grieving wife was gone. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to live in that house alone. You're not the one whose future is being drained by a man who can't even remember what day it is. You just want to see me penniless, don't you? You want me to have nothing left so you can laugh at me. The paranoia was back, in full force. It didn't matter that my father was in the ICU with tubes snaking out of his body. To her, this was still a competition. This was still about her versus me. She saw my advocacy for Dad's care as a direct theft from her pocket. For the next 48 hours, I lived at that hospital. I slept in those cramped plastic chairs. I was the one who spoke to the nurses about his vitals. I was the one who held his hand when he woke up, terrified and unable to speak. My brothers would come by for an hour, bring a coffee, pat Dad on the arm and then leave because the hospital vibe is just too depressing. And Mum? She came once a day, usually in the afternoon. She'd sit as far from the bed as possible, her eyes glued to her phone, occasionally sighing loudly if a monitor beeped too much. On the third day, I was in the room alone with Dad when she walked in. She didn't go to him. She went straight to the small table where I'd placed his personal effects, his watch, his wedding ring, and his wallet. She started rummaging through the wallet. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice hushed. "Checking his cards," she snapped. "I need to know which ones are active, and I'm looking for the card for his lawyer. I know he keep a copy of the estate contact in here." "Mum, he's right there," I said, pointing to the bed. "He's awake. He can hear you." She glanced at him like he was a piece of furniture that had been moved. "He doesn't know what's going on. Don't be dramatic. I need to protect myself. If he's going to be in a facility, I need to make sure I'm the primary on everything. I'm not letting some state-appointed stranger or you get your hands on the accounts." "I don't want the accounts," I nearly yelled. "I want you to be a human being for 5 minutes. Your husband is fighting for his life, and you're acting like a vulture circling a carcass." She slammed the wallet down and marched over to me, her face inches from mine. The smell of her perfume, that cloying, floral scent she used to mask everything, was suffocating. "You think you're so much better than me," she whispered, her voice trembling with hatred. "You think because you're the good daughter who cleans and cooks that you've earned a place here, but you're nothing. You're the same little girl who used to cry in the corner while I drank. You were weak then, and you're pathetic now. You moved back here to try and steal my life, but I'm going to make sure you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." I looked into her eyes and realised something that should have been obvious years ago. My mother wasn't just a recovering alcoholic. She was a person whose soul had been hollowed out long before the first bottle was ever opened. The alcohol had just been a symptom. The real disease was a total, absolute lack of empathy. She was incapable of love, because love required seeing someone else as a person with their own needs. To her, we were all just supporting characters in the tragedy of her life. "I'm not leaving because I'm scared of you, Mum," I said, my voice finally finding a steady, calm rhythm. "I'm staying because he needs me. And the moment he's safe, the moment he's in a place where you can't neglect him or hurt him anymore, I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with the slack. I'm done with the games." She laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "You'll be back. You need me to hate you. It's the only thing that gives your life meaning. You love being the martyr. I didn't respond. I turned back to Dad and took his hand. He was looking at me, and for a second the fog in his eyes cleared. He squeezed my hand. Just a tiny, weak pressure, but it was there. He had heard her. He knew. The following week was a battleground. The social worker and the medical team recommended a high-end nursing facility only 20 minutes from the house. It was clean, it was bright, and it had a dedicated wing for neurological recovery. Most importantly, it was expensive. Mum fought it tooth and nail. She wanted him moved to a state-run facility 2 hours away, a place with documented safety violations and a reputation for warehousing the elderly. It's more fiscally responsible, she told my brothers. It's a death sentence, I told them. Mark and David were caught in the middle. They didn't want Dad to go to a bad place, but they were terrified of Mom's wrath. They were also starting to get tired of the inconvenience of the whole situation. They wanted it settled. They wanted to go back to their lives where they could just be the best and favourite children from a distance. Maybe the other place isn't that bad, David suggested during a conference call. Mum says she did research. She says they have a great gardening programme. David, they had 3 cases of elder abuse reported last year, I said, my voice cracking. I went there. I walked the halls. It smells like bleach and despair. If we put him there, he'll be gone in 6 months. Is that what you want? To save a few $1,000s at the cost of his life? You're always so extreme, Mark sighed. Mum just wants to make sure she has enough to live on. She's 65. She has no income of her own. She has his pension. She has social security. She has the house. I was screaming now, pacing my kitchen. How much is enough? How much of Dad's life is she allowed to trade for her comfort? In the end, I had to do something I never thought I'd do. I used the one thing she feared most against her. I went to her house while my brothers were there. I sat them all down in the living room, the same room where she'd spent the last 20 years playing games on her phone while the world passed her by. I've consulted a lawyer, I said, laying a folder on the coffee table. And I've documented every instance of neglect I've witnessed over the last year. The missed medications, the delay in calling 911, the financial threats. If Dad isn't moved to the facility the doctors recommended, I'm filing for emergency guardianship. I will take his care and his estate out of your hands entirely. I'll take it to court, and I'll bring the medical records and the doctor's testimonies with me. Mum's face went a sickly shade of grey. My brothers looked at me like I'd just grown a second head. You wouldn't, Mark whispered. You'd sue your own mother? I'm protecting my father, I said. And if that means I have to burn this whole family down to do it, then get your matches ready, because I am not letting him die in some hole just so Mum can buy a new car next year. The room was silent for a long time. I could see the wheels turning in my mother's head. She was calculating. If I took her to court, her reputation in the community, the sober, saintly wife, would be shattered. The best and favourite sons would be dragged into a public mess. She looked at the folder, then at me. Fine, she spat. Put him in the expensive place. Let him drain it all. But don't you dare think you're welcome in my home ever again. You've made your choice. You've chosen him over me for the last time. I chose him 40 years ago, Mum, I said, standing up. You just finally noticed. As I walked out, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness. I had won the battle for my father's safety, but I had finally accepted the death of the mother I never truly had. The transition to the facility was hard, but Dad started to stabilise. In the quiet of his new room, away from the tension and the screaming and the games, he seemed more at peace than I'd seen him in years. He couldn't say much, but he knew I was there. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of my victory began to set in. My brothers stopped calling. My mother blocked my number. The slack had finally run out, and the family was officially fractured. And then came the message that changed everything. The message didn't come from my mother. And it didn't come from the care facility. It came from Mark. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, the kind of hour where a ringing phone only ever means one of two things: a birth or a death. My heart was already hammering against my ribs before I even reached for the nightstand. The text was short, cold, and stripped of any brotherly affection. Dad's had another episode. Massive stroke. He's back at the hospital. Mum's already there. Don't bother coming tonight. She's the legal next of kin, and she's already told the staff you aren't welcome in the room. We're handling it. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen burning into my retinas. We're handling it. The favourite child and the best child were finally stepping up, not out of love, but out of a sense of duty to the woman who pulled their strings. And in their version of handling it, the daughter who had spent the last year scrubbing floors and managing heart meds was suddenly a stranger. I didn't listen to him. I was in my car 10 minutes later, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal insult, every mile a reminder of the decades I'd spent trying to prove my worth to a woman who saw me as an inconvenience. When I arrived at the ICU, the atmosphere was different than before. It wasn't the chaotic energy of the first collapse. It was the heavy, stagnant air of the end. I walked up to the nursing station, my voice tight. I'm here for my father. Room 412. The nurse, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at her computer and then back at me. Her expression shifted from professional to pitying. I'm sorry, are you? She glanced at the screen again. The daughter? Yes, I'm his daughter. I have a note here, she said softly, leaning in so the other staff wouldn't hear. The primary contact, his wife, has requested that you be denied visitation. She stated that your presence causes undue stress to the patient and the family. Undue stress, I whispered. I'm the one who's been caring for him for a year. She doesn't even know his blood type. I understand, the nurse said, and I could tell she really did. She'd seen this family dynamic 1,000 times. The toxic gatekeeper using their legal status as a weapon. But my hands are tied. Until the social worker arrives at 8, I have to follow the spouse's directive. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I just walked over to the waiting room and sat down. I waited for 4 hours. I watched the sun come up over the hospital parking lot, the light turning the grey asphalt into a dull gold. I watched people arrive for work, watched families leave in tears, and watched the world keep turning while mine was stuck in a sterile, fluorescent-lit limbo. At 8 a.m, my brothers walked out of the double doors of the ICU. They looked exhausted, but when they saw me, their faces hardened. Mark stayed back, but David walked right up to me. I told you not to come, he said, his voice a low hiss. You're making this so much harder for Mum. She's a wreck. And every time she thinks about you being here, she starts spiraling. Is he still alive? I asked, ignoring his lecture. David sighed, rubbing his face. Barely. He's unresponsive. The doctors say it's a matter of time. Maybe hours. Maybe a couple of days. Then let me see him, David. Just for 5 minutes. I won't even look at her. I'll wait until she goes to the cafeteria. Just let me say goodbye. I can't do that, David said. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't anger in his eyes. It was fear. He was 40 years old, and he was still terrified of our mother's disapproval. If she finds out I let you in, she'll lose it. She's already talking about cutting us out if we side with the traitor. Her words, not mine. The traitor, I repeated, for wanting him to have medical care. For wanting him to live. Just go home, David pleaded. We'll call you when it happens. We'll make sure you're included in the funeral arrangements. Just give her this one win, okay? For the sake of peace. The sake of peace was the phrase they'd used to justify her alcoholism for years. It was the phrase they used to explain why she didn't have to apologize for the years I spent in dirty clothes with unwashed hair. Peace in our family was just another word for my silence. I stood up, my knees cracking. I'm not going home. I'm going to the social worker's office. And then I'm going to the hospital's legal department. If she wants to play next of kin as a game of spite, she's going to find out that I've kept every single text she sent me this year. The ones where she called Dad a burden and a drain on her retirement. The ones where she told me she wished he'd just get it over with so she could move to Florida. David's face went white. You wouldn't. Watch me. I spent the next 3 hours in meetings. I showed them the texts. I showed them the medical logs I'd kept. I showed them the bank statements where I'd paid for Dad's supplemental supplies out of my own pocket because Mum refused to waste the money. By noon, the hospital's ethics committee had been briefed. Because my father had never officially revoked my status on his previous medical directives, the ones I'd helped him sign years ago before he got really sick, there was a legal grey area. The hospital couldn't bar me from the room without a court order, especially given the evidence of potential elder neglect I presented. I walked back to the ICU with a security guard and a social worker by my side. When we entered the room, my mother was sitting in the corner, her phone in her hand, the familiar ping of her game echoing in the quiet room. Mark was standing by the window. When she saw me, she stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. "I told them you weren't allowed here," she shrieked, her voice cracking the silence of the intensive care unit. "Get out! Security! Get this thief out of my husband's room!" The security guard stepped forward, but not toward me. "Ma'am, please keep your voice down. This is a quiet floor. This woman is the patient's daughter and has valid medical power of attorney documents on file. She has a right to be here." "I'm his wife," she screamed. "I'm the only one who matters. She's nothing. She's a mistake. She's just here for the money." "Mom, stop," Mark said, his voice sounding small and ashamed. She turned on him like a cobra. "Don't you stop me. You're just as weak as your father. If you don't help me get her out of here, you can forget about that down payment I promised you for the new house. You're both useless." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark looked at the floor. David, who had walked in behind us, looked at me, then at the floor. The best child and the favourite child were finally seeing the price of their titles. They weren't loved. They were on retainer. I didn't look at them. I didn't even look at her. I walked straight to the bed. My father looked so small. The man who had once been a giant to me was now just a collection of bones and pale, translucent skin. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged and supported by the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. I took his hand. It was cold, but it was still his hand. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Behind me, my mother was still hissing at the social worker, her voice a poisonous stage whisper about legal action and disrespect. But for the first time in my life, her voice didn't have power over me. It was just noise, like the beeping of the monitors or the hum of the air conditioning. She wasn't a monster anymore. She was just a bitter, lonely woman who had traded her soul for a sense of control she would never truly have. I stayed in that room for 18 hours. My mother eventually left, unable to stand the disrespect of my presence. My brothers stayed for a while, sitting in awkward silence before they too slunk away, unable to look at me or the man in the bed. It was just me and him. In the middle of the night, when the hospital was at its quietest, Dad's hand gave one final microscopic squeeze. I don't know if it was a reflex or a goodbye, but I like to think it was him finally letting go, knowing that for at least one moment in his life, he was being cared for by someone who didn't want anything from him but his peace. He passed away at 4:12 a.m. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. There was no grand reconciliation. There was no "I'm sorry" from my mother. In fact, she didn't even call me to tell me the funeral arrangements. I had to find out through a cousin. At the service, she sat in the front row, draped in black, playing the part of the grieving widow to perfection. She accepted hugs and tears from people who hadn't seen her in 20 years. She talked about their beautiful second chance at love. My brothers stood on either side of her, the loyal palace guards. I sat in the back. I didn't cry for the family I'd lost, because I'd lost them a long time ago. I cried for the man my father could have been if he'd been strong enough to leave her the first time. I cried for the 11-year-old girl who deserved a mother. After the service, as people were heading to the cars for the procession, I found myself standing near my mother. She looked at me, her eyes dry and hard as flint. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice low so no one else could hear. "You ruined his final days. You made it all about you. And just so you know, the lawyer called this morning. Everything, the house, the accounts, the insurance, it all comes to me. You're getting exactly what I promised." Nothing. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt a genuine sense of relief. "You're right, Mum," I said. "I am getting nothing. I'm getting no more late-night calls about your struggles. I'm getting no more accusations of theft. I'm getting no more cleaning your house while you insult me. I'm getting no more slack to give. I'm finally empty of you." I turned and walked toward my car. "You'll regret this," she shouted after me, her voice rising as the best child tried to shush her. "You'll be alone. No one will ever love you like a mother." I didn't turn back. I got into my car, buckled my seatbelt, and pulled out of the cemetery. As I drove home, I took my phone out of the cup holder. I opened my contacts. I scrolled down to her name, the one that just said her birth name. I didn't change it to Mom. I didn't change it to Snake. I just hit the block button. Then I did the same for Mark and David. I realized then that the golden children weren't lucky. They were trapped. They were still in that house, still playing those games, still waiting for a love that was never going to come. I was the one who was finally free. The story of my life had been written in the margins of her addiction and her narcissism for 44 years. But today, I was starting a new chapter, and for the first time, the only voice I could hear was my own. Looking back, I asked myself if I was the asshole for cutting her off. My family still thinks so. They send me emails from burner accounts telling me how cruel I am to leave an elderly woman alone in her grief. They tell me that family is everything, but family isn't a blood type. It's not a legal document. Family is the people who show up when you're dirty and broken and teach you how to wash your hair. It's the people who stay by your bed when the world gets dark. And if that's the definition, then my mother was a stranger I happened to share a last name with. So, I want to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have kept giving slack until there was nothing left of yourself? Or would you have walked away sooner? Let me know in the comments. Your stories remind me that I'm not alone in this. And if you've been through something similar, maybe it's time you stop giving slack to people who are only using it to pull you down. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. We share these stories because the truth deserves to be heard, even when it's uncomfortable.